So what's gonna happen? We have like, we should have four online. Yeah, so this is the email that you send your presentation to. Yeah, we're gonna. Let me add Josh.
Yeah, Dr. Joshua Kintayo online.
Yes, online. Yeah, it's presented. So I'm trying to send you his presentation now. But we don't with that. No. No. No, I can't send it.
I'll send it to you again, Dr. Akin.
Yes, I have it. I'm just trying to send. I think it's gone, Yeah, it should be with you now.
Okay.
Okay. Where?
Yes, I received it.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Where again? Just wanted to wait. Because actually sits here. The problem now is also that we don't have the other presenters now. We should have at least five or even six.
Dr. Akin, Shelley is going to join us very soon. She sent me a message.
Okay. Let me send another one to you. Yeah, so there's this other one.
I just want to confirm, did you stick your video or is this internet connection?
We're currently trying to project the video. It will come out soon. Yeah.
Okay, so let me share, because I can just read the questions from here and the themes we'll be talking about. Okay, someone else is joining.
Is this a time for me to share the screen?
Yes, I think Josh would want to go first. Or have you shared yours as well?
Yeah, I've sent mine to you.
Okay.
Studying international security from an African bank.
Yeah, what I have now. Is this what we're sharing now?
Are we sharing my? Are we starting with me?
No, not. I'm just. Yes, the one I've just sent is slide 1. Yeah.
Do I have permission to share my screen or something when it's time?
Well, yes, of course. When you want to share your screen.
Oh, okay. So the one I sent to you, I don't know if you received the latest one. It said slide 1.
Okay, so we're sharing yours first.
Yes.
It's ready.
Okay. Not that one. Not that one.
This
No,
one.
that's mine, but I'll just share
Yes,
my
that's Josh's. Yeah.
I'll share my when I
Yeah. So I'll just have the kind of overview, then Josh goes and you go. But there's general discussions that we're going to have after that.
Okay, I didn't know you sent it to.
Yes, the latest one. So could you confirm? Okay, has Shirley joined yet? Okay, but Shirley will join. Okay, so
Yeah, she sent me a message.
okay.
Hmm.
Sorry,
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So hi everyone. Welcome to our roundtable. That's titled "The Past, Present, and Future of African Security Research: Setting the Agenda." And so basically, what we'll be trying to do today would be to try to set the agenda, and also some of the participants, my co-chair and the participants, they'll be and discussants, if you like, they'll be presenting some of their ideas. But the theme is that we are going to also come back to talk about different things, how it emerged, the history of African research on security, the current state of affair or state of play, and also is it possible for us to maybe suggest or maybe nudge ourselves towards a particular type of agenda in the coming years and decades. So my name is Dr. Akin Oyawale, and I think I would let others also introduce themselves, and then I'll proceed from there. So if you could.
Yeah, my name is Emeka Njoko. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Government, University of Birmingham, UK. Yeah. So my research has been on counterterrorism and civil society. I've also looked at the effects of counterterrorism on gender and sexual minorities. So.
Yeah. Thank you. And we have Josh online as well. If you could introduce yourself very quickly, Josh.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Joshua Akintayo. Completed my PhD at University of Kent, currently a postdoc at University of Bayreuth in Germany. I study critical security studies, basically my paradigm, understanding the governance, transformations, and consequences of counterterrorism, violent extremism, conflict-related sexual violence, and peace building in Africa. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Josh. So I'm not sure if we have any of the other presenters.
Yeah, Usman.
Oh, yes. Usman, could you please introduce yourself? I can see you from here now. How are you? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good. My name is Usman Alabi. I'm just completing my PhD at the University of Warwick, Politics and International Studies Department. My research is on everyday impact of counterterrorism on people and looking at the dimension of bifurcated security, everyday political economy, especially in the Lake Chad part of Nigeria, basically. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And a disclosure, Osman is my supervisee, and he's just completed his PhD with minor past revival with minor corrections. So just an overview. If you could move to this second slide. So the point is, what are we even doing? What kind of task are we trying to do here? It's a very complicated task, right? But we're going to have a go. Of course, there are two presentations in terms of slides, but of course, we'll be talking about different things. So basically, we address the emergence and development of African security through interrogating its emergence, how it's evolved, and also where it's headed. So one will be a theoretical, kind of meta-theoretical and methodological exploration of the overarching conceptual claims and empirical arguments that have been advanced on Africa, interrogating their often unacknowledged ontological, epistemological, and methodological and normative commitments, for example. So when people make claims about African security or about Africa as a continent, are there particular assumptions that people make relating to security, relating to insecurity, relating to defense, relating to the state, all right? Also in relation to other continents that are close to Africa, or even in the way that Africa has been divvied up. For example, you have the concept of the Middle East that tries to construct Africa in a particular way, or even the concept of the sub-Saharan Africa, which positions the Sahara as a particular thing that demarcates Africa into different sections that you can make claims about. And then you can connect that to subjectivity as well. So what about the temporal classifications of Africa into, for example, pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial, where everything is in relation to coloniality and the colonial experience? Is it possible for us to disrupt that, to, for example, come up with an alternative version? Or what does that mean if we can't disrupt it? Can we ask questions about how we came to be, right? And what it does to the type of knowledge that we produce about Africa? This is often taken for granted from, for example, the conversations that we've had, and all the discussions will be addressing this. And yeah, thank God I'm the chair. I'm not going to be unpacking things as you, but I'll try my best as well to see what I can. So also, what are the roles of gatekeepers as well and intellectual tourists, quote unquote, who position themselves as experts on Africa, thus discrediting legitimate dissenting voices? So basically, this gatekeeping of Euro and Western centrism, and what role does that play? It could be in terms of funding, it could be in terms of different aspects, publications, right? In terms of reviews, people that emerge as experts, quote unquote, and the role they play in shaping knowledge that people make about Africa. We're not making assumptions that Africanness is this essential thing. We also understand how that is produced, right? And tensions there. So in contrast to dominant positivist approach to security on Africa, more recent advances within critical security studies have included a growing attention to lived experiences. So the people are not written out now, the marginalized voices. Is it possible to listen to these people more in terms of what they make of themselves, what they make of, how do they even define security? Are there local understandings of security that escape being captured in what we currently do? For example, even the term security, do people really use it in their understanding of their experiences of insecurity? Or even terrorism, for example. If we do the history of terrorism, we can trace it to French and then through to Latin as well, terrorism, right? So do people share that same understanding of the concept as well? So we're also trying to look at coloniality, race, and reflexivity, and I'm sure and discussants have done a lot of things on this, and they'll be speaking to that more in-depthly. And then also, what roles do qualitative and ethnographic methods have to play in this disruptive kind of journey and task that we've set ourselves, where we allow locals to speak about their own security, which could then enrich our themes that we can then use to make sense of security in our research and also in impact, as we've been doing, and how have these changed over time as well. So also finally, our discussants will be looking at two things. The first one is how our theory travel. So we're looking at different concepts. For example, we talk about realism in mainstream and liberalism. How do they travel if we apply them to the African context? Is it possible for us to find some tensions there or some misrepresentation of Africa within these theories themselves? And finally, we'll try to see if we can engage in this massive Herculean task of charting the future for African security research. So that's just an overview, and the next one there. So so we have a massive Avengers kind of list there. You can see the lineup there, but sadly some have not been able to attend. Okay, yes. So yes, so Dr. Suleiman as well. I knew was traveling, and that's great to have Dr. Suleiman there, and Dr. Shirley. So we have Emeka Njoku, Dr. Do we have Dr. Kogbe there? Oh. No, okay. So we have Joshua Kitai, we have Usman Alabi, we have Shirley, and we have Suleiman as well. So I believe we'll start with Josh. Your presentation is ready.
Trying to share my screen, and it seems
yes.
like
So how many minutes? Excuse me, Josh. How many minutes are you planning to? Not more than
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be very short.
Very short. Yeah. So we can go through the themes and then back and forth. How many minutes?
Like 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. So you have around 5 minutes to set the scene for us with your presentation.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we'll move through the other.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much once again. My name is Joshua Akintayo. I'm not yet to make a formal presentation per se, just share some contemplations around my thinking that's been shaped by my research generally, my field work, and most recently by my most recent publication, where I had like an reflective article around conducting terrorism research in Africa and Nigeria, what it means for international security, right? So what I want to talk about this afternoon is basically how African security research would benefit more by moving from just being data generating to theory generating, something that's been a topic of conversation over the years for those that study terrorism and all forms of political violence. So what I tried to do is to think through the major concepts that emerge from the article you are seeing on the screen. So seniority, reciprocity, and hierarchy. Think about it vis-a-vis the temporal markers that define the panel of discourse. So the past, the present, the future, and see what that reveals about the state of African security research in that sense. So I say that, so let's start from the past. What's already known, what most of us have been, those that have studied security in Africa for years or even not so long, have been well accustomed to about the fact that for decades, African cases, I mean, I wouldn't want to go into so many cases now, but I mean, approximately Congo, Nigeria, and some other Kenya maybe have been sites for what Dr. Akin called intellectual tourists to gather data, right? So Africa supplied the cases for security studies generally, where theoretical postulations are made. Africa supplied evidence that are used to apply to Western-generated theories. And so those theories are then imposed as universal lenses that define how we Africans mostly define, understand, and experience security. So we talk about how Western institutions, something that is very emblematic of what Alatas called the global division of labor, where Africa is marginalized in terms of discourse on international security and security studies. Africa sort of occupies a paradoxical position where you are you are the site for gathering evidence for security, but not where theories about security are made, right, or are generated. So Africa is marginalized. There's this constant marginalization around security theories that are used to help us understand the field. So if you take a sample of, say, 10 journal articles written by either Africans or non-Africans, you would find something that I constantly notice, where the contribution is mostly restricted to empirical contribution. So you would not really find that kind of broad theoretical contribution around issues around security. It's mostly making a theoretical and empirical contribution, empirical contribution, and empirical contribution. And then the way we are respected within the field, it takes a blow, because you are not seen beyond being, well, let's just come gather the data, spend 3 weeks, and people that spend 3 weeks are regarded as authorities on African security than, say, somebody like Dr. Akin or Kemeka, that themselves data personified. All right, so we tend to listen to the intellectual tourists and respect them more than those that are African by nature and data emblematic of data in that sense. I moved to the next contemplation that I had, say, well, presently, is this situation changing? I put as an open question that would ponder and reflect on and say, this whole situation that has shaped our understanding for decades, how is it changing so far? So I then go back to the concept that emerged from my own fieldwork about how my African identity actually shaped my access to data and knowledge production, to think through how I think this is changing. I say we can think about it through 3 ways. So hierarchy, first point. We say who gets access to knowledge about African security? If we are trying to ask ourselves if this is changing. Have we seen changes in terms of who access knowledge? I mean, that's a question that we'll still ponder on. Like I said, it's not going to be very definitive. My presentation or my discussion is going to be definitive. It's just reflections and ponderings. The second point is around the concept of seniority, saying whose voice is authoritative when we talk about African security. Like I mentioned, are we still confined to racial logics of say, the intellectual tourist being the authoritative voice? Or is it that the African voice is still considered authoritative? Then, I mean, if we think about all of this, think about it in terms of how epistemic inequality still exists, how the issue of skin pigmentation of the researcher in the context still takes predominance over knowledge, right? I then talk about two shifts that I think the field could experience in terms of how the future should look like, since we are setting the agenda, and I hope we are able to set the agenda successfully, right? So I think about it in terms of two ways. Say methods. That's one of the impediments that I noticed about African research, where we sort of import methods. We are not creative with our methods. We don't adapt methods to suit our contextual local realities, right? That's one of the ways I think we could think about the shift for the future in African security. The second way is thinking about ethics, right? So there's this way we conceive ethics to be very follow the letter. There's this template where ethics must follow, where we don't think ethics is malleable, right? And that sort of shapes how we access, how we think through, how we interpret data, how we access data itself. So what we think, what we plan to go do in field is not what we actually experience in the field, and that's what I think could move forward. Finally, my chair is nudging me. Finally, setting the agenda, I think the only way, one of the ways, I wouldn't say the only, one of the ways, that's my proposition, I think we can set the agenda is through epistemic transformation of how we think about African security. Who do you feel speaks to addressing issues of citation politics? African scholars do not cite each other. Yes. And yeah, I'll stop there for now, and I hope we
yeah, that's very loaded, Josh. There's so many things. An interesting thing is that because we're still going to come to the themes, and you've already even gotten ahead of us, and you've addressed so many things, and we'll be coming back to that. And there are some things I want to take from that, the importance of race. And, we were talking about skin pigmentation, and I think that's quite important in terms of when we start reflecting on who gets to speak and whose knowledge has value in this hierarchy, and also how has that changed over time as well. And also the aspect of not just data, because what came to my mind is seeing the raw material aspect, right, from the margins to be like, hang on, we have to take this data, but we have to shoehorn it into this preformed form of knowledge systems, right? Which very often those knowledges have been used as aberrations. Those data, for example, Hegel was saying Africa is not a part of history, right? It's not that Africa is not there, but it's not a part. Let's put it on the side, right? That difference, right? And that's quite important. And what we're going to do now is we're going to move to the second presenter. So just an overview, and then because we're still going to talk about the different themes and also reflect on some of the points that Josh has made.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Once again, my name is Emeka Njoko, and I'm trying to, my reflections around studying international security from an African vantage point. What does that mean? Well, first is the idea of decolonizing. Sometimes we use the word decolonization, I've read a lot about it, but what does decolonization mean in practice? What does it mean? For me, what I see decolonization is also about not just challenging those assumptions or security assumptions that have been, developed and that you would see as that flows primarily from the West, that you define as various theoretical frameworks that have been Western theoretical frameworks that have been developed to study international security and all of that. So most times we see research PhD students who so much worship theoretical framework. Theoretical framework can be a guide for you to study and specific areas in your research, but it shouldn't be defining. It shouldn't be the thing that defines your research. So the idea is for you to maybe understand the state of knowledge, be on top of the literature. Yeah. But the task for an African researcher studying international security is to also develop frameworks yourself. And we do talk about, empirical material. Empirical material is good. Empirical research, I've done empirical research a lot, and I think it's very, very good. It helps a whole lot to be able to develop frameworks from engaging with these study participants. And sometimes, because when we try to worship theoretical frameworks so much, we ignore the experiences of Africans or those who are affected by insecurity and things like that, and how those knowledge, those experiences can help us understand security better. So when we talk about decolonizing studying international security from the African vantage point is also about decolonizing. In practice, it's about challenging, not only challenging those assumptions, but actually developing theoretical frameworks from your empirical materials. So that is one. Field decolonization, that's directly contesting the structures that marginalize African voices. There's a saying that they say nature abhors vacuum. If you create a space, it's going to be filled. If African international security scholars do not occupy those spaces, you cannot say, oh no, we are not allowed to speak. You have to claim those spaces. So you claim those spaces from the type of research that you prioritize, right? So you claim those spaces from not just, most of the type of research that we do often are historical or critical. And so it's often more like state-centric type of research, emphasizing so much about the states and this and that. And so because we have, we have these, is it a model that we have in some way, I don't know where we got that from, to be able to study Africa, we more like the voices of African voices are invisible. We've created that invisibility, not just only because of the structures that makes us invisible, but also we have failed to claim those spaces that are open for us to claim. And that is one thing. Field decolonization, that's what it means in practice. And also methodological independence. You developing new research design, concepts, questions, which builds on my previous arguments. Developing concepts, theories is also rooted in experiences in the field. From the empirical material, you can be able to develop concepts and theories. And sometimes, well, I wouldn't go into that, but drawing from personal experience, I also see empirical material as opportunities for me to be able to come up with concepts that we can use to understand the African experiences better. It is often more illuminating than drawing from Western frameworks or Western theories, because they cannot really explain everything. They can't explain, for instance, giving an example. For instance, I was studying wartime sexual violence, and the key theories that were predominant was weapon of war argument and opportunistic sex. But when I was interviewing my study participants, they were saying something, oh, this is spiritual and that of that. And for a Nigerian, often more like trivialize such things. Oh, everything. Why do we have to make everything about spiritual and all of those things? But we don't understand that we can actually develop concepts from those experiences, from the conversations that you have with study participants. That is one thing. Also, decolonizing, also editorial representation, pressing for a genuine non-Western presence in editorial boards. That's one key thing. Within terrorism studies, you can go online, check the key terrorism studies journals, studies in conflict in terrorism and political violence. You can hardly see an African who is if you see maybe one, that is not representative. An African who is, I will continue. I will continue much later. An African who is a board member in those things, that is a form of gatekeeping. And that also affects you, right? So I would explain personal experience on how the role I have played in that aspect. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that brilliant overview. And what that suggests when you were making the presentation was the aspect of we meta-theorizing and philosophizing as well. It's not just we jump in and say, okay, we want to propound theories. For example, one of the most important works on realism, the Leviathan, was actually Thomas Hobbes documenting the English Civil War. But it's stood the test of time because he theorized into it, and there was a way that's been, even the Peloponnesian War, for example, from Thucydides, people still talk about it today, talking about the Pelian dialogue, right? So I think it's that tripartite to see how we can redefine, okay, theory as a tool, theory as a form of critique, but theory as, as a verb, where we theorize, not just use theory, where we can even say, can we even separate those experiences from theory itself, right? The production of knowledge, is that in itself a form of theorizing, right? Which then means we can open up that and there can be different possibilities. And also the origins of approaches, because what came to mind when you're talking about the decolonial, what are the origins of the decolonial approach as well? Does it suit the African experience, especially the sub-Saharan African experience from its Latin American kind of roots as well? And even the post-colonial, where we would often talk about Edward Said, right? But the Negro is not it's not the Orient. If you look at it, he talks about it later in his later publications. And I think was it Francois Bayat that then talks about extraversion and tries to force the Negro into the Horn of Africa, saying the Orient also came in through the Ethiopia and Mozambique and all these things. And we'll talk about that later. But I think some of our other presenters have joined. Before that, would talk to Usman for overview, and then we'll go to Shirley, and then we go to Suleiman. So just a brief overview if you have something for us.
Yeah, same thing with me here. Two scenarios I wanted to paint out. I recall when I was doing my second year review for my PhD, and it was like the committee at some point in time could not understand why I was looking at how people experience counterterrorism. It was like, yeah, of course, I don't want to say that my committee is constituted of non-Africans. And it was like, oh, it was a conventional understanding of counterterrorism, like the effectiveness of counterterrorism and how the state have to devise a means to ensure that it succeeds. So it was difficult at that point in time to explain to them that, yes, there is an effective dimension of counterterrorism, but then also there is a dimension of counterterrorism itself that is experienced and lived, and that constitutes insecurity for people in those areas. You know, it began to make sense later about a year ago when I then began to gather data, could be able to substantiate these findings. Now, and what first struck me was that perhaps if I've deviated, or gone along with what they were saying there, then it would have been difficult to justify the creation of knowledge from the point of people's lived experiences with what is perceived as the state is creating security, the state is fighting terrorism. But then, how do we then justify the fact that the fighting and the countering of terrorism for over 10 years itself could become a problem for the people on ground that is not that is difficult for us to justify? And that's where my own research about people's lived experience as it concerns counterterrorism comes in. And then again, another dimension in my overview is the fact that people have agency when it comes to experience of security. For example, on the field, I realize that most times people relate with two security experiences: the experience they have with the state who, in quote, is fighting terrorism, and the experience they have with the terrorists themselves. You know, in such situation, it's difficult for us to examine or measure that or determine that they have agency, because in the real sense of it, they are not shouting, they are not protesting. There's no complication in that everyday relationship. The farmer just go to the farm normally. If he encounters the terrorists or the insurgents, he engage with them in a way that protects his means of livelihood. He leaves that same situation and come to the main town where he encounters the same soldiers who also are fighting terrorism. And at that point in time, he also relates with them in a way that there's no problem. So on the surface, it looks as it is complacent, but in the real sense of it, at the deeper level, at that everyday level, what you see is that, these guys have agency. They just find a way to negotiate their everyday security and the likes of it. But again, there is this Western dimension that is called a hybrid security in quote. And sometimes it looks as if, this thing has been captured. Hybrid security in the sense that, within the state, there are different security actors and different security enactors and the likes of it. But the point again is that why experiencing counterterrorism and why in the process of enacting counterterrorism itself, beyond hybrid security, the state itself not only creating security, it also bifurcates the everyday space, whereby it operates in one space and people and then you have the insurgents operating in other space, and then you have various security actors finding a way to transverse or go between the two spaces. So subjectivity over time is very important and can be seen, especially because counterterrorism has continued or continued to exist as time goes on. So for me, the concept of bifurcated security within that space and that everyday normal security, people having a different perception of what security is as they experience it, as they encounter it, is not something that is that you easily find or see over there, and it's not something that is easy to explain. Yeah, okay, I can see that my time is up. Is that what you're saying?
So I can see you guys, so I'm assuming that I'm not being seen. It's like the panopticon. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, and what's really interesting there about subjectivity and agency and how we can reflect on, for example, African subjectivity and how people navigate and negotiate different security apparatuses. For example, how do they negotiate with insurgents in such a way that it's no longer that insurgents produce insecurity, they also provide security in a sense. And when I was doing my fieldwork, I could remember somebody told me that when I said, what do you understand about security? What do you mean? I said, security. Okay, security. The security in my village is Boko Haram security. If you pay them, they let you go. If you don't, you're in trouble. I was like, okay. Because I didn't know you could actually assign security as something.
Can we say his experience is more like ontological counterterrorism, right?
Yeah.
So he's more like those drawing from the lived experience of people who are more like trying to protect themselves, form of protection.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. So now, thank you very much for that overview. I think we'll move to Shirley now. And if you could introduce yourself very quickly, and then we'll move to Suleiman after that. So, hi, Shirley.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really apologize for joining
No,
a
no,
bit
it's
coming
fine.
from class.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
understand. Yeah.
Okay. Nice to see you, Emeka, again.
Yeah. Hi, Shelley.
Hi. Yeah, so my name is Shali Echeng. I'm an assistant professor at the United States International University here in Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm also the executive director and inaugural co-convener of the African Network of Critical Security Scholars. And I mean, that's whole network, I mean, is a security network. So I mean, being in this conversation today is very relevant. Apart from that, I'm a decolonial scholar. It's something I really take a lot of pride in because my PhD essentially looked at decolonizing counterterrorism. And I came up with an indigenous African framework of looking at counterterrorism essentially in Kenya, but it's an African framework that can be applied in all African contexts. Yeah, so I mean, the discussion of today is really relevant to me as a person, and of course, for my work as well. But for me, I think I'll just speak from my heart because this is something that I'm very passionate about. When I just saw past, present, and future, I was like, I mean, this is really timely, for all of us. So, I mean, the way I look at the discussion, I mean, I'll look at it from different lenses, of course, coming from the decolonial school of thought as well, and looking at things from, wearing that lens of this and bad, where we look at things from, what essentially was in the past, what was it, how was security understood in the past, how is security understood today in the present, and how do we envision security in the future? So just thinking about it around security issues, and especially for counterterrorism, what was there before? We need to understand where the continent is coming from. How was security understood during the colonial, before the colonial era, in fact, what changed after colonialism? And of course, we all know that after colonialism now, the African governments that took over power just simply inherited these colonial outfits. Like, for example, here in Kenya, once we got independence, which we call the flag independence, by the way, because that is all we can see. You see, because neocolonialism is still taken, a lot of root in Kenya and in Africa. Once colonialism was over, and especially like here in Kenya, the example I'm giving is that the security apparatus, of course, from Britain, because we were colonized by Britain, essentially trained, the police that we have in Kenya, or we had in Kenya at the time. So they trained them, and they empowered them with this colonial, mindset, and we saw that, and we still see that even in the way the police are carrying out their duties. There's a lot of force in the way that things are done. I mean, Kenya is just one of the many countries that changed the police force and changed the name to police service. But I mean, the service part is something that we are still yet to see, because there's a lot of force. Where is this force coming from? The force essentially is coming from the colonial aspect, because this was an outfit that was designed for controlling the indigenous populations, and today the police is still working for the state, because they are taking orders for the state. Seen many instances, even here in Kenya, where, I mean, during the Gen Z protests, even today during the protests that are still going on, I mean, the police is still an institution that is controlled largely by the state. Now, where do Africans, what sort of agency do we have in matters of security? The way security is understood in Africa is still very state-centric, so things flow from the top down rather than from the bottom up. Look at all our security, the sort of knowledge, the security knowledge in itself was from, I mean, it flows in a unidirectional manner, coming out of the West, coming into Africa rather than the other way around, The other day we had Macron, for example, here in Kenya, because, I mean, with things going south for him around West Africa and the Sahel, I mean, now Kenya really is very strategic for them around the Horn in the East Africa region, and they've been shopping in Kenya, for allies as well. And they've made a defense pact with the Kenyan government. Now, the big question is, even as we're heading to France and we're looking west for all the knowledge, I mean, on intelligence sharing, border security, and all of these things, what are we doing essentially with our African knowledge that we have, What are we doing essentially with all these rich, complex nuances that we have, thinking about concepts like Ubuntu and all of that? Does it mean our knowledge in security is irrelevant, such that we have to go and shop outside for, knowledge coming out of the continent? I'm seeing I'm being warned about the time, so I mean, I'll just stop it here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And there's so many interesting points you've made there, and it will be good for us to reflect later what we do with our own kind of knowledge systems, because as you mentioned, if you go back in time, being anti-colonial, for example, was a terrorist activity. Basically, we saw with the Mau Mau and so many, even in Algeria and so many other countries like that, where For example, even Margaret Thatcher referred to Nelson Mandela as the leader of a terrorist organization, right? So that we can even ask questions about what the liberal terrorism does when it is deployed against Africans or people of color, people also against brown people as well. No, stop. Yes, so Dr. Suleiman, are you there? So Dr. Suleiman would introduce himself and have this very quick overview. Is he muted? Suleiman? I think the network. Suleiman, can you hear us? Okay. We might, I think we might have to come back to Dr. Suleiman there because I don't think his network is letting him communicate with us. So we have the quick. I'll try to send a text. So we've had the quick overview here, and if you could go back to the slide I gave the slide one, because I would want us to reflect on some of the themes.
This one.
Yes, the one that says slide one. Yes. If you go.
I have to share this one.
Okay. Yes, you can share the screen. Yes. Can you go a little bit to the themes? It will show the themes. I think the third. Yes, the themes over there. Yes. I think coming from our overviews and some of the ideas that we've already had there. So I think what we need to do now is to see how we can get through the themes. So the first theme here is the historical emergence and transformation of African security research, state and non-state actors within the African context. So what do we make of African actors in their attempts to, for example, engage in security provision? Because I think Usman mentioned there in terms of how the state itself is viewed, where the state is not often seen as a positive actor. Yeah, the state could also constitute insecurity. It's not just an African case. Across time, it's been the case that states are often the bully as well in so many cases. So what do we make of this? And I think anybody can have a go with that in terms of transformation of African security research as well within the context of we can talk about state centrism and all those kind of things.
You mean the state as creating insecurity?
Yes, and that the role of the state generally and how research prioritizes and privileges the state, for example.
That is one of the roots, I would say, of critical terrorism studies, right? The idea that the state itself carry out acts of terrorism.
Yeah.
And so one of the arguments, if I could recall, is the definition of terrorism as a political act, right? So the targeting of a few number of people to influence the polity. By polity, I mean the state. And so that is an activity that the states often use to define non-state actors. Whereas if you look at the concept or look at the definition, very contested definition of terrorism is that if you want to understand terrorism, you have to look at the politics. Like it's very political. The violence is political. It's not like every top form of violence, like violence from a serial killer or things like that. What defines terrorism is the political nature of the violence. And sometimes it's also communication. What are they trying to communicate with? Violence is a form of communication. And so they're trying to communicate to a large number of people by targeting a particular small number of people. So communication is when through an act of violence, you're trying to reach out to a broad number of people. And so critical terrorism scholars, one of the arguments that they made is that if you look at this definition of terrorism and look at the activities of the state engages in acts of terrorism. And they went back to the French Revolution, right? And to say, oh, look at even the etymology of the concept of terrorism emerged from the activities of the state.
Yeah.
And that is one of the arguments. It emerged from the activities of the state, turning against the people and all of that. And so, yeah, And let's come back to our contemporary Nigerian society. And I've made that argument about terrorism, about I wrote in my paper, the merchants of terror. The merchants of terror is not just the terrorists themselves, is the states as culpable actors who have made insecurity, who have commercialized insecurity in such a way, and that they create sense of insecurity because of what they get out of it. So yeah, the state engages in acts of terrorism for various reasons, political and sometimes for commercial reasons too. So yeah, I think that's my take on that.
That's an interesting point. And I don't know if there's anybody who wants to jump on that, because what's really interesting is, yes, of course, people don't usually talk about state terrorism, right? Of course, it's a sub-genre. Some people talk about it, but it's like you're just talking in one corner, only one person is listening to you. But when you talk about terrorists, non-state actors, everybody's like, yeah, tell us about it, right? And what's interesting is, even in the few cases where states have been labeled as terrorist states or rogue states, they usually don't apply that to so-called liberal states.
Yeah,
exactly. Like they'll be like, oh, it's that Libya, it's
Yeah.
it's Cambodia, it's this. They don't usually. But the point is that the case?
The politics of definition.
Of definition as
of
well.
terrorism.
Yeah.
Who defines
Who defines
terrorism?
terrorism?
Yeah, what
And
factors?
whose definition
Whose definition
sticks?
sticks? Yeah,
Who has
whose
the power?
definition is universalized and projected to other parts of the world. Yeah. So even when Western states engage in that act of terrorism, people don't see that. Oh no, they can't do that. So yeah, who defines it? Makes that have that power to be able to ascribe rules.
Yeah, Josh.
Yes, thank you very much, Charles. I just want to piggyback on what you and Dr. Emeka said, and particularly narrowing on the issue of state terrorism, reflecting on if you think about the extent of research done on state terrorism in Africa, it's literally non-existent. I mean, to talk about what Dr. Emeka said in terms of the politics of labeling and all. And one of the reasons that's been, I found that particularly challenging, right? Considering the prevalence of state terrorism, to speak Nigeria, for instance, right? In every ramification, both in terms of gender-based state terrorism, in terms of movement, social movement, proscription, in terms of even just proper state brutality and all of that. I found that challenging, and I think one of the reasons that have come to, so let's say, take that in comparison with, say, the United Kingdom, right, where Sam Raphaels and Ruth Blakely have done all of this extensive work on state terrorism, and you begin to wonder, why is that not in Nigeria? Not to compare, but one thing I found challenging, I think that's something that I found in the teams of the panel, and what both of you have done in your research, is the extent to which primary data on terrorism in Africa, in Nigeria, is a challenge. So if you have a good proposal around state terrorism, right, excellent proposal that you think will fly, who are you going to get and speak to about primary data around state terrorism, right? I think that would speak to the issue of gatekeeping. Which state policy actor would tell you explicitly that we perpetrate state terrorism, and you would allow you interview and have their thoughts recorded as research. So I think, just to reflect broadly, I think that's one of the challenges that we have. As much as we can see the practice of state terrorism, it's, in comparison to the kind of knowledge that we produce about, it's literally minute and not existing in a way. Thank you.
I think not just okay. I think you can, of course, you can get that data, right? Depends. Some state security operators are very critical of the state too. So not everybody, more like, So some of them believe that the state is complicit in that. Of course, the identity would have to be protected for them to be able to divulge certain information. I know that I was interviewing a brigadier general, and he told me, off your recorder, let me tell you. And he told me, off the record, this is what is going on. And so, and in that conversation, he was telling me the role, the culpability of the state in creating a circle of violence. So so I think it all depends.
That's very interesting. And
Alan Suleiman has not said anything.
Yeah, I think
he's online now.
I've sent him a message. I don't think his network. I don't think he can hear us. because his mic is not even showing. I don't know what's, is it?
He's not muted.
Yeah, so it's just strange. Yes. Any other comments online? Because the few things we can also talk about there. And then, for example, I think one thing we can talk about, because of course, when the state does exactly the same thing as you mentioned, Schmid and Youngman, right, with their consensus definition, right? They said when the state does targets people and tries to spread fear, right, use fear in a kind of communication, then we should be able to say it's terrorism. But some people are saying, would that be very helpful? Would that mean that we are conflicting so many things that are not quite similar because the state has capacity, right? And in that sense, we could say it's repression. But Chomsky has said that there's wholesale and retail terrorism, and that there are two big wholesale terrorists in the world, and that's the US and Israel, right?
Yeah.
And we can see that, yeah, we can have empirical evidence to support that. And it's quite interesting how we will reflect on not just, of course, getting empirical aspect, but also to be able to theorize, to say, okay, hang on, we can get data. Okay, Dr. Shelley has a, yes. Shelley,
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
the discussions are really interesting. I mean, as Emeka had said, we don't have the monopoly of definition in this part of the world, you see, because literally in Africa, and I'll give the example of Kenya, the term terrorism itself, there is no Swahili definition of terrorism. It cannot be translated back into Swahili, which is, I mean, English is not our first language at all. So we have our Swahili language, which a lot of Kenyans speak and is spoken in the whole of the East African region. It cannot be translated in that manner, because when we look at some of things like terrorism, the first time the word actually appeared in Kenya was in relation to the Mau Mau, because they were the first people in Kenya to be defined by that term, terrorism. So what remains in your mind, you know, and that is the definition that is still moving across. I mean, to sort of look at people who have defied the regime of the day, of course, being that the Mau Mau, of course, you know, fought for our own, you know, their own self-determination at the time, you know, and they were branded as Mau Mau. Essentially, what were they doing? Because the Mau Mau were fighting, and I mean, they were beheading, and there was a lot of killing and all of this. But then look at the exact same modus operandi that the colonial government was using on the indigenous African population is exactly the same. But you see now when it is moved in that manner, then for them it becomes, oh, we're protecting ourselves against the Mau Mau, when we're justified to use force. That is the same outfit that states are still using, because states position themselves in a high position. They take the position of God, where now they say, we, as the state, we are justified to use force. And we are still seeing that, and that is why, I mean, even today, we are still grappling with this monster called terrorism that we essentially don't even understand ourselves, because we cannot understand anything but by our languages, our own indigenous languages, then we do not understand it at all. So that is the conundrum where we find ourselves as Africans, trying to define things that we do not know their origin, we do not know where they came from, how they were first used, how they even came and found themselves in the continent. And we are trying to continue a conversation that literally we do not know where it actually began.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's very interesting. And you could expand that and extend that to so many things. And for example, there was this, and we don't even talk a lot about, for example, colonialism, especially forceful colonialism as a form of terror, right? Yeah, because there were so many communities that they actually accepted the colonial authority because of what had happened in another place. Like, do you want that to happen to you? And I was reading this material on, I think it was in Ibadan or something, when that was even around pre-colonial period, when there was a lot of kidnapping on the streets. And I was bringing that with the banditry, where people were being taken off the streets. And it was so bad that people said when you were being abducted to be transported across the Atlantic Ocean in the street and you scream, people will be like, Mabalo in Yoruba, that means be going with them. What are you doing outside at this time of the day, right? So for me, I just thought about it like, but we don't think about that as a form of terror in any, you know, as in the history of we have banditry now almost everywhere, right? We don't make those connections at all in terms of, creating that human cargo in a way, and which they meant you could go and grab people and then take them, and that creating fear that people get sun down like this, everybody's inside, and if you're outside, let the devil take you, basically, in a way.
Usman Halabi racist.
Okay, Usman, yes.
Yeah. Another thing I think is that, yeah, because for me, the colonial state itself is in a way a terrorist state, in quotes. We could debate that. So if we say that the post-colonial state itself has still has this relationship, or still shares some of the characteristics of the colonial states, yeah, we could argue even now that it is there. One of the things I'm thinking about is that sometimes the challenge with knowledge creation in Africa is that we are always reactive about it, in the sense that state terrorism had been there even since the 60s. I was looking at the literature on how the Nigerian state engaged with the pogroms of the 1960s that led to the coup and so on. And technically, if you look at that literature, it was basically terrorism in the 60s.
Yeah.
Take it back to 80s, 70s, at those strategic time when the Nigerian state had to encounter one crisis or the other, it is always practically terrorism in the real sense of it. So the fact is that the reality had always been there. But then we would then begin to react when the Western knowledge comes with an idea that, oh, this is what is, and we're like, oh, we may have this kind of thing here also, and they will begin to be reactive, even up till now, And then there's the issue of conceptualization, which Shelley mentioned about with regards to how we see terrorism itself. I think over time, we also have to decolonize that idea of terrorism to reflect what we think about. So, yeah, it is violence, no doubt. But again, if the state is supposed to provide security for me in Oyo State, for example, and in that state I can't go and sleep overnight, I have to be looking at my back. At that point in time, it becomes terror. But what you're looking at is just a group of people coming, perpetuating insecurity, and that becomes terror, using it as a tactic. But can the reaction of the state and the insufficiency or the incapacity of the state, when it has capacity itself, be defined as a form of terror for us here? Because we cannot keep looking at that Western conceptualization of terrorism for them. For us, it's a different reality entirely. If I could travel around Oyo State in the past 3 years, and suddenly in 1 year I can't travel overnight, that could be redefined. So I'm not saying that is how it should be. I'm saying that for us to engage some of these concepts, we need to really decolonize, not be reactive about it, be perhaps proactive on what we see as this issue, and that's what I think.
Yeah, thanks, Usman. And it's very interesting there how you talked about the colonial state itself being terroristic, and how that has been inherited by the post-colonial state. And a lot of people would argue because the colonial state was based on white supremacy. But the point is the post-colonial state didn't have that same luxury. We are indigenous like you, but we are still using a framework that was based on white supremacy. And some people have said, like, this interregnum, right, in that transition, and that's why you find all the problems, because they didn't have that same power, for example, from London, and that's why most states almost collapsed shortly after independence, right? And there's been a lot
to build on that, Achebe said something that the colonial governments often expressed disappointments that we did not practice democracy, right?
Yes.
And but the colonial government is not a democratic. It was never democratic. It was the extreme form of totalitarianism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totalitarianism. And so that idea, in fact, the type of government that we inherited from the colonial is basically what they taught us. It's basically the type of government that they managed during that time.
Yes.
The type of so-called democracy that we are practicing is basically Totalitarianism, where the people doesn't matter. It's just this review.
This piecemeal grab.
Yes, exactly.
Quote and unquote rights to people.
And so when they try to suppress the people through violence, that's the definition of terrorism.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what critical terrorism scholars will tell you.
Yeah.
That if the government, the state, try to suppress the people through violence as a way of communicating to a broader audience, that is in itself an act of terror. So that is state terrorism.
That's very interesting. So any final points on that? Because we have, I know time, we have like, yes, we have to move on very quickly. So I think we can take the next two themes together. So the role of dominant narratives such as pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial framing of Africa. What those narratives or that way of narrativizing history in Africa, what do they serve for? Should we engage with them more critically? And also the influence of gatekeepers. So feel free to take any of this. And intellectual tourists in shaping knowledge production.
Gatekeepers. Gatekeepers. You find them in journals, various journals, for particularly terrorism study journal. Like I said earlier, terrorism study journal. I can hardly see Africans as members of board members within terrorism study, or even editors or things like that. Those things matter. We don't know that. I can tell you from my own experience as an associate editor of Journal of Intervention and State Building, where I have had the opportunity of reviewing articles. Normally, the editors will get certain articles they feel are good. They'll hand it over to you as the associate editor. So associate editors, they do more work, because you would have to read that and then look for reviewers and assign the journal to a reviewer. And so once the reviewers come with their reviews, you would have to look at the reviews, read the work, of course, you've read it, and then you summarize the reviews for where the authors should prioritize, areas that you should prioritize in the revision, right? And of course, you give that to the author. But there are cases, because these days it's difficult to get reviewers, where one review is in and you're waiting for the second reviewer, is not there. So the editors will tell you, act like the reviewer. So you are also a reviewer. You have to review those work and you come up with a decision, whatever or so. And the editors will then act as the whatever or things like that to make a final decision or things like that. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that you see those processes are very, very influential in determining who gets in, whose work gets published or not. So I have seen works whereby from African scholars, because one of the things that I try to do is to create that visibility of the journal for African scholars to send their works and things like that. And I've seen the type of mistakes that are often made, right? Those type of mistakes would often get I would get a rejection. But I try to be very constructive. And even the journal editors would see that I'm try to be very constructive in the sense that how you write your introduction, how you write all those things is like structured in such a way that it's easy for them to really understand what the reviewers are telling them to do. But sometimes most people don't understand it. What are they telling you to do? How do you go about writing it? So, but then that's because I am African. I understand the type of challenges that we face in our part of the world, with type of how invisible we are within that international security. If I'm not there, those papers will be rejected. I can tell you that. They don't have patience. Academics are overworked in the UK and in the US. Particularly, I can talk of the UK because we have several things we are doing. There's no time. You're reading very fast. So if I cannot see your argument within a few sentences, I'm throwing it away. I don't have time. If you cannot make your point clearly in your introduction, I don't have time. So I've just thrown it away as you. So you might have made the point towards the end of it, but that's against you. Yeah. So who would have that patience to say, okay, I'm coming from a world where we don't have access, and this is my position here is not just I'm a journal editor, but just try as much as I can to create opportunities, right, for African scholars to be visible, their work to be published and things like that. But then if I'm not there, I'm not saying that I'm the champion or whatever. I'm just saying that is the role that Africans would play if they find themselves in those spaces. what they will contribute, how that will contribute in terms of giving opportunity or access to early careers, particularly.
And that's very interesting. And we can even extend that into the reviewers themselves.
Yeah.
And what types of choices of reviewers and how reviewers, even with the rejections and with their recommendations, shape even those that are accepted from what is submitted and what comes out in terms of, these arguments. I'm not convinced by this argument. Look at this, look at that.
Yes.
And
so that is what the associate editor does. So what I do, sometimes I ignore, I will tell the author, focus on these areas of review. So I don't want to challenge the reviewer. I don't want to say anything, but I'm interested in these areas. So focus on these areas, I will let it go through, right? So that's it. So that is how you show that level of power within that space to say, okay, focus on this review. Sometimes they would say some very, very derogatory, whatever, things like that. Just tell the author, focus on these areas of review. So I try as much as I can to be able to do that. So, but we don't have a lot of Africans in those platforms. Just check those journals. You won't see any one of them. And check the level of rejections from this part of the world. You will see how high it is.
So do we have any points on the two things online? Because if not yet, I feel that. But if there's anybody, and linking to your experience, there was this press release I was involved with, and from the inside, I could see the politics very clearly, which means that I was thinking that if I put myself, for example, in a random African university, would have had that opportunity. And I see things, I'm like, I'm even here, and I'm seeing this, I'm experiencing this kind of thing, let alone the fact that I didn't have this kind of privilege or influence, which is important. But I don't know, it's a big monster, right? You can, as you've mentioned, as an associate editor, for example, you can do your own thing, but there's also the bigger machinery that is working in terms of what types of knowledges are prioritized.
Although there are works that are bad, right? There are works that are good, but poorly written, not well articulated. Yes. So exactly.
Okay. Yes, Shirley.
Yeah, I think perhaps what again we need to ask ourselves is, are we writing back? Because part of the agenda really to decolonize discourse is to write back, right? To talk back, to write back. Are we given the opportunity to do these things, you see? Because you find that, speaking about intellectual tourists, apologists, gladiators, people who masquerade within knowledge production actually get kept, you find that a lot of African scholars remain marginalized, in our own knowledge spaces, within our spaces, again, we are marginalized. Because what happens is that there's a lot of extractive research that is going on at the moment in the African context. I see it all the time, even in the university here, where I'm teaching. There's a master student who asked me, what theories will we even use? Because there's no African theory anywhere. And I was really surprised because African theories actually exist. But are they given the limelight? We are all speaking about realism, liberalism, Marxism, all of these theories coming out of the West. Do we even teach these theories ourselves as people that are interacting with the students, Because for me, I make it a point, whether I don't care which course I'm teaching, I have to speak about decolonizing everything, Because again, if we don't give ourselves the space, who will give us the space? We write papers all the time. But then your line of argument does not agree with the traditional and dominant frameworks or traditional and dominant work that is out there, and you get high rejection rates because, again, what is happening in Africa is imposition of knowledge. People like Alatas have written about it. Intellectual imperialism is extremely rife in the continent, especially around the areas of security, counterterrorism. These are areas that have been dominated, so much by the West, and they define everything from top down, and how the architecture, the whole security architecture that is happening in the continent is derived from the West, or rather from all manner of foreign influences except our own. So we need to ask, what role are we playing, even in our own spaces, to write back, to speak back, you know? We have our African journals, but we see, again, we compete a lot sometimes to write, you know, in journals that are Western journals, or that are high ranking, that are, you know, which journals do we have in Africa? I mean, there are journals that are in Africa that we can write and we can elevate and we can start and we can have panels, you know, that will look at our scholarship, you know, in the same light. Remember, again, we are writing in a foreign language. You know, people like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, all his books written in Gikuyu. He's indigenous. Actually, his books were translated to English, not the other way around. You know, they picked his books and they were translating in English because he refused to write in the colonial language. And his books are really, I mean, they've been read the world over. And I mean, this was one of the most rebellious scholars of his time, you see. And I mean, even in our own spaces, we can actually do this so that we don't remain in the margins. Just saying, oh, I mean, there are gatekeepers here preventing us, but we have the agency to do something.
I agree a lot. And I think one way to be able to do some of those things is to draw from contextual understanding to more like developed theories. In IR, there is more like another term that we don't know about, a term whereby you draw from, I mean, it's feminist research agenda. One of the things that they argue is that we should draw from subject epistemologies to develop theories of international relations, right? So that's one of the key things that they did. So you draw from those subjects to be able to develop theories and stand against universalization of ideas. And that's what's more similar to what Beatrice Spivak called multivocalism. Is it no? Beatrice Spivak said, let the subaltern speak. So it's going to that person call it multivocalism, right? So not like, singular. It's not a singular, like various subjects, various views, and how that can help us understand IR better or things like that. And that's it's on us as African international security scholars. We should stop. Taking theories, Western theories, to be able to understand what happens, because those stories are not nuanced enough to be able to understand our own experiences. In gender studies, in feminist theories, then we can develop concepts. I mean, Joshua has done something recently, developing the concept of Suvu as local peace building. So he was answering the question, because they asked the question, what is the local in local peace building? Because the question scholars asked, who is the local, where is the local, and what is the local peace building? And one of the questions he answered at is, what is the local? This is the local. When you're talking about local peace, and people talk about local peace, we don't know what it means. This is local peace building. Local peace building, local peace building are the conflict resolution mechanism rooted in our social norms, cultural norms that we can use to theorize, to help us understand peace building as a concept broadly. So we can. That is how one of the ways in which we claim those spaces. And oh God. Maybe the light is telling us to go. Okay, And so one of the it made me lose my thought. Local peace building. So local peace. So I think one of the things that we need to do is how we could draw from all those subjects that we engage, that we interview, to be able to develop concepts, develop theories. And within the UK, those type of research are considered world leading. Those type of research, because in UK we have what they call research excellence framework, right? Many of the works that I did, drawing from that subject epistemologies to engage in IR theorizing, were classified as 4-star, 3-star. There are things that we can do. I think one key thing is, number one, be on top of the literature. I have never stopped reading. I read like I'm still a PhD student. And if you're doing an interdisciplinary research, that's the burden. You have to read those other fields. You have to, when you move to those fields, you have to read their literature and things like that. On top of the literature helps.
Okay, Josh, I can't see you now, but yes, I should be able to hear you. Yes.
Yes, I just want to add to what Shelley said, what you said earlier, and what Emeka said, in terms of marginalization, in terms of strategies to get our voices heard, getting out of this epistemic violence kind of thing, right? If there's a word for that. I think that one of the impediments, I mean, it's good to look outward, to critique these things from the outward, right? But I also think that we need to look inward, like Dr. Shelley said, writing for ourselves. I think one of the ways in which we are shooting ourselves in the foot is through the politics of citation, right?
Yeah.
There is a citation that most African scholars do not see. And so I studied within terrorism studies, I studied how the leading guys in the field, particularly critical terrorism studies, cite each other. It's just like they speak to each other every time. They don't go outside that box.
Yeah.
It's always the same guys you see repeatedly in different
Echo chamber.
ways.
Echo chamber, yeah.
And then you find ourselves, African scholars, we don't, even when we know your colleague has done something or is writing something in that regard, we don't cite each other. And then we go and complain about marginalization. It's just people don't understand the politics and dynamics of that citation game. It's
a game, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I personally made it a point of duty to always cite Nigerian scholars doing good research on terrorism in any article I write. Yeah. Any article, you find it there. Because if you don't cite ourselves, nobody's going to cite us.
It's as simple as
that. Nobody's definitely going to cite us. Not the guys that are the big guys in the field. They know each other. They cite each other. So I think one of the ways, decolonizing citation, maybe a word like that, decolonizing that Western case of citation should be one of the ways to get out of that bubble of being marginalized every time.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And the point is, once these works start being cited, they become the main, right?
Yeah.
Dominant kind of voices on those topics, right? And we don't do enough of that, right?
Yeah.
And combining, and I think going back to some of the earlier points as well, in terms of African journals and stuff, yes, but linking it to your point as well, when it comes to tenure and when it comes to that, they start talking about indexing, right? They start talking about Q1, they start talking about these things, which means that there's also that politics, which means that
and they'll tell you,
don't
do that, don't look those metrics. They look at it.
Very central. Even book publishers, for example, there's the politics inherent in that. And going back to also how about the subaltern, right? How documenting African experiences was something that was actually all frowned upon and almost even banned. We talked about when he was writing the manuscript for Things Fall Apart, and this lecturer or somebody was looking at him like, what, you want to write like exactly, like it was almost strange.
It's the global knowledge division of labor. Yes, where there are certain expectations, the type of research or things that you write or not.
Should be written about.
Exactly. You can't write about
it rather than you writing about yourself and your experiences.
At that time, it would be class unethical, right?
Yes, it was. That was what anthropology did at the time.
Yeah.
Now when you sit down, you take the notes. Oh, this Black African. Oh, he actually has eyes, has 2 ears. He can actually walk. And I read some of these things going further back to Ivan Cowden and the documentation. He was writing about the Garamantes, and he said that their cow used to go backwards. I was like, bro, if you read that today, you'd be like, these are diaries of Africa. These were things that most Europeans that had initial encounter with Africans actually took at fact. And then Hegel was referencing some of these things, right? Like, yes, about the Negro, quote and unquote. And I think what's important is, as you've mentioned, almost as an activist kind of scholar in some of our works, of course, it can be every time that we're able to advance our voices and, if possible, also give, cite ourselves, also create this network that we can come together and pull our ideas together and be able to advance them in such a way that it's more collective rather than individual, because you can't win. Shirley, you can jump back in.
And I don't know if any of you has read this very, very interesting article by Elizabeth Tilly. The title is My Flight Arrives at 5 a.m. Can you pick me up? The gatekeeping burden of the African academic.
Okay.
And I mean, we rarely speak about these things. I mean, look at the inequalities that arise out of publications, just publication, open access. How many, there are a lot of inequalities, that arise out of this system, which just because it's systemic sort of inequalities that, leave out the scholar from the global south, and particularly African scholars who cannot afford, to even get access to, especially open access. So at the end of the day, sometimes you have 10 articles you've written, then you appear like somebody who always is busy in the kitchen cooking up a storm. Nobody's citing your work, meaning nobody's eating your food.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody's citing
Always
exactly the
busy.
politics of citation.
Yourself. That's a monologue. Yeah.
Yeah, we perpetuate that marginalization when we fail to cite fellow Africans who are doing good work.
And I think we can connect this also to the politics of almost divide and conquer as well, right?
Yeah.
In such a way that even when you meet academics sometimes in maybe Western or European universities, it's almost as if one black person only. It's almost as if I'm the only person that's allowed here. And it's almost as if you are a threat to me in a way. And I felt that energy a couple of times in such a way. And that citation connects to it. Like if I'm citing you in a way, I'm
enhancing you.
Yeah,
so I shouldn't cite you so that you don't go.
You're a threat in a way. In this ecosystem where it's dog eat dog in a way where it has to be one black person, which was what they did in the Americas, for example. If we privilege one black person, we have to knock this one off for another black person to come through on this table, right? And I think we have to reflect on that and how we don't see this sort of mutually exclusive or a kind of zero sum in a way, where
some game.
your benefit is my
loss,
right, in a way, and we have to start thinking more in a different way about that. So we have 5 minutes left. So if there's any final points, we have less than 5 minutes. Any final points at all? Because I think we've had very rich conversations across the board. If anybody has something to add,
I think what I would suggest way forward is that we should, build on these round table. We should think about next year. Think about creating an African international studies. I know that exists, right? Whatever. So, but we can create one for Lagos. We can create one for BISA in the UK, and create one here in whatever. So, and we can then invite people. We can say, start talking about it. They'll be able to invite people, so we have much more people, and we can also look for grants, so able to get small grants for people even here in Africa. So it's not just more like a round table, more like
it can be a section, even a section at ISA or visa.
Sections. The African ISA will be expensive. It's not as US, so it will be more expensive. So we're talking about African scholars. So African scholars in Africa. So we're trying to more like create opportunities for them.
They do have bursaries as well.
Yeah, exactly. So the focus should be here, something like that. Maybe next year. Should think about that next year.
Any addition to that? Because that's a good idea to have something more stable rather than just this one.
Just a one-off thing. Yeah. So we can think about more and. We have 3 minutes.
We have 3 minutes. And if there's reflection on future of African research, security research is one thing that I've been addressing, and going back to the point of where we talk about the decolonial approach with its Latin American origins, the post-colonial itself, of course, that has different origins from its Edward Saidian kind of origin, the Fanon aspect of it, but also the Indian origin. We're talking about Spivak and the rest. There's this tendency to want to shoot on the African experience or the Negro experience here. I'm using that term deliberately, into other broader kind of, experiences and arguments, right? For example, as Bayat was mentioning, saying that the Negro could be said to be Oriental in some sense, but that's not the point. Can we talk about a security, a knowledge that is specifically ours, right? Can we have that without having to attach to something else? Right, and that's why I respect Malcolm X when he was talking about his ideas, but also he also did a little bit of that with the Nation of Islam and all those kind of things. But can we have a knowledge that is for us and that we don't try to attach to any so-called external, kind of entity to get legitimacy in a way? So in that way, I also think that we can also problematize the temporalization of pre-colonial and post-colonial as well. That we can start talking about security in different communities and how they've understood it across time. right? For example, in the 18th century, in the 17th century, and we have some of these that are documented, for example, in Yoruba proverbs, that if you read some of these proverbs, that some people have published now, you see how they talk about the human experience, how they talk about community, how they talk about society. You see different epistemologies that come out of that, even in Ifa as well. Some people have done that in Ifa incantations. You see people talk about life, the relationship between the environment and the human condition. All these things are there. So 1 minute, any final points?
Final points, 1 minute.
Okay, so 1 minute. I think I have to bring this to a close now. It's been very productive, and thank you everybody for contributing and for joining us online as well. So you have a wonderful evening, and thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Final words? No?
No, thank you everybody.
Yeah,
thank
just
you for
wave.
coming.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye-bye. This is very
Bye.
Oh, it's here. This is really good.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sorry. I was looking for it. I didn't find it.